What does it mean to live more with less? I'm Katie Wells, and welcome to the Maximized Minimalist Podcast. If you found yourself caught up in the hamster wheel of modern-day motherhood and want to rewrite the script, congratulations, you're in the right place. I'm here to be your guide and help you take back your motherhood and achieve a simpler, more joy-filled life. Cheers to being a maximized minimalist. Enjoy the show. Jill, welcome to the Maximized Minimalist Show. I am so stoked to be hanging out with you again today. I was just on your show not long ago, and it just feels like talking to a friend. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Like we said, I think we have a lot of aligned messages, very similar audiences. So I'm excited to be here with you and your listeners.
Okay, so let's just go right for the jugular, if that's cool with you.
Let's do it. My throat's ready.
So I want to talk about impulse spending. I read an article the other day that blew my mind, and it said the average American spends about $5,400 annually on impulse purchases. And so my question is, why do you think impulse buying is just so prevalent, and what factors are at play? And I know that's a very loaded, nuanced question, but I'd love your take on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers here. And what I first want to say is we are not bad. There is nothing wrong with us for impulse buying. There is a part of just our humanity, our own desires, something that we see, that we like, that we want to buy. That's okay. I think what we really want to recognize here is at what point does our impulse spending potentially disrupt beneficial financial decisions for us? And where do we maybe want to be reining this in so that we can say better yeses with our money? So that's my foundational piece here to say, yes, we do it. We all do it. I don't think that there's any getting rid of impulse buying altogether. But if we're identifying, okay, this is a pretty big part of where my spending is going. Like you said, the $5,400 a year. What else could I be doing with that? And if I could rein this in a little bit, how might I be able to do that? So alongside just us being human and operating as humans, and there being nothing wrong with that, we also have marketing tactics at play. And marketers have become so good at understanding behavioral economics, how we operate, the ways in which we make decisions, and try to get us to impulse buy. It's how businesses run. It's how products are sold. And what's also happening here, and this has been happening since the late 1800s, kind of industrial revolution timeframe, is that marketers are trying to essentially manufacture desire. There was a really interesting study that we found, or not study, history lesson that we engaged in when we were writing our book, Buy What You Love Without Going Broke, about this guy named Edward Bernays. And he's been coined as the father of public relations. He was actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud. So he, in his marketing and public relations, took some of the ideas of his uncle of human psychology and blended that into the sale of products. So in 1927, he began working for the American Tobacco Company. And one of his first strategies to sell more cigarettes was to persuade women to smoke, selling cigarettes as kind of this way to help you reach this ideal thinness. And then also utilized that in conjunction with the suffrage movement, calling cigarettes torches of freedom so that women would smoke more and vote, which is, brilliant, but a little malicious at the same time. These types of things continue on. He also wrote Propaganda in 1928, which taught how to engineer consent. So this is the tapping into people's unconscious impulses, read impulse spending, to see products and as something that they want to buy. So almost creating problems that we would then need to purchase in order to solve. And I think so much is subconscious here for us that we don't even know that these are problems that have been created, manufactured for us to purchase the solution for. And this is embedded into product sales, lifestyle sales, you name it. And I'm not calling all marketers malicious here. I think people are just doing their jobs. And sometimes there are products that I want to purchase and I'm glad to know about the benefits of. But I think understanding a little bit more of what's at play when it comes to marketing can help us be equipped to know, okay, that's marketing, tapping into some of my unconscious biases, and I can interrupt this, create a pause, and be a little bit more mindful about this decision I'm about to make.
I love how you started off with just the permission piece and, understanding that the end goal is to never impulse purchase again, because I see so much shame that comes up for people who are trying to save money or declutter or simplify as a whole. And when they quote unquote do something, they think they shouldn't, right? This is bad. I shouldn't be doing this. Other experts or gurus are saying I should have done this. That can be so hard. And when we're stuck in shame, it can really keep us there. So the permission piece, I think, is so important, so valuable. Thank you for starting with that, because then it's just like, oh, look, the end goal is not perfection. Like, I am human. And I do 100% agree that it is woven into our history, our psychology, like our humanity. In the Edward Bernays piece, I actually read about him not long ago. He's the one that was also like, propaganda, people don't like propaganda, so we're going to call it PR, right?
PR, exactly.
PR, yes. That's the same guy. I was like,
yes, coined the term public relations.
Like, yes. people don't like that word, so let's change it. And
exactly.
Interestingly enough, even as you were saying these subconscious things, like if I were a woman back in like the 1910s and I see a poster of whatever cigarette company he was working for, and I see a picture of some idealistic woman and the torch of freedom, think about what that would symbolize to women back then. Even if they weren't smokers, now all of a sudden they're like, oh, it's about what it represents. Like, what am I buying into? And I think perhaps, right, and this too, I think perhaps one of the biggest things I learned through my simplifying journey is that we're not buying stuff. We're buying stories. We're buying aspirational versions of ourselves. We're buying solutions to insecurities, feelings, emotions. Like, that's the humanity piece that you can't extract from it, right? Exactly. You can't. You simply can't do it. So, okay. So once we recognize, like, if I have a listener who's like, I know I'm impulse spending, I would like to reduce it and save for retirement, save for an emergency fund, save for a trip to Disney, whatever. What steps can we do to help reduce that? Like, what do you do when you see an ad on Instagram or Facebook and you're like, oh, I want this? Like, what's the process you go through?
So a couple of things that I would recommend to somebody. One's a little bit extreme, and I will start there. Okay. So the two pieces, and then I'll go through them. The first is a dopamine fast, and the second is to then identify what kind of impulse spender you are. So with a dopamine fast, what we recommend here is doing a 30-day no spend challenge. And that does sound really extreme. And I know I just said we're going to continue to impulse spend, and that's not wrong or bad. And now I'm saying don't spend at all. But the reason being, when we can create this hard stop on some of our spending, it allows our brain to reset. We're looking at some research done by Anne Lemke on her book called Dopamine Nation, where people were struggling with various forms of addiction. So she's not just talking about shopping, but other types of addictions as well. And she found in her research that just 1 month of abstinence from whatever the addiction item was help to retrain those neural pathways and pleasure receptors in the brain, even allowing that same item to be introduced back in maybe more reasonable amounts. And so no spend challenge is not new. We did not make it up, but it was really cool to kind of see it supported by this research by Dr. Lemke, to recognize that when we are able to pull ourselves back from something that is giving us some sort of high, probably an increase in dopamine, probably some sort of coping mechanism for us. But when we're able to step back from that, not spend on you're still going to be buying gas. No one is typically impulse purchasing gas. You're still going to be paying your bills, but all of these more quote unquote discretionary spending items we are cutting out. And of course, we're preparing for this. We're not just next day deciding no more spending. We're going to be a little bit more mindful about what food do we have in the fridge? What am I not going to spend on? What am I going to spend on? And what this allows us to do is see, what am I drawn to spend my money on? And what solutions did I find when I chose not to spend? And it's not going to go perfectly, but what we usually find for ourselves and what we hear from our listeners who engage in this is how much they learn about their spending habits and patterns and how much creativity they then find in themselves of how they were able to solve the day-to-day problems that they encountered without purchasing the solution. And we're not going to stay there. We don't love to live in extremes, but we can visit them and we can take hold of the good pieces of each extreme and find our own, what we call radical middle, kind of holding the tension of the two extremes and finding what works for us. So eventually, yes, we're going to reintroduce going out to dinner. We're going to reintroduce purchasing home decor items and clothing and whatever it is, but in a much more mindful way because we were able to reset some of those dopamine receptors.
Oh, that makes beautiful sense. And I agree that it gives us an opportunity to tap into some of that. I mean, you say creativity, to me, it's like resourcefulness in a way, as well. And resetting feels like such a good positive term versus like, I can't do this. And sometimes I feel like when we feel restricted, it's like we want it even more. So to look at it through that lens and again, support you after that 30 days is really fruitful. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about here.
Yeah, not for the sake of deprivation.
Right.
There will certainly be some sacrifice in it. It will be a little difficult at times to not spend on the thing you are accustomed to spending on, but it shouldn't be deprivation. It's more so the sacrifice and hopefully deeper understandings of self where you might even tap into, I actually didn't even enjoy spending on that to begin with. And I like this thing better, this other solution that I found better. The next couple of things that I know I had mentioned is then identifying what kind of impulse spender you are. And I think the reason that I recommend starting with a 30-day no spend challenge is I think it can bring that to the surface a little more, although it's not entirely necessary to do. If you're like, that's not for me, I don't know, I'm just putting my feet in the water, that's okay. I think we can also just be curious about ourselves. We could look back at our transactions to understand where we are continuously impulse spending. So the top 5 reasons that we impulse spend, not an exhaustive list, but where we might find ourselves is either habit spending. So this is just something that we typically do. We're not even thinking about it. It's just when we're at the store, we also usually buy some sort of drink when we're out. It could be stress. Shopping. So when my cortisol levels are high, a way that I cope with that is by online shopping or even going out to the store. It could be shopping as an activity. This is for me something I really resonate with growing up. This was something we did on the weekends. We went to the mall. That was so what good. You did. And you walked around with your friends. And, my mom would call it window shopping, but we'd always walk home with something. It wasn't windows.
No, and I spent my fair amount of time in Claire's. Like your mom or dad maybe give you 10, 15, 20 bucks and you were like living your best life. So it was like that social and the social aspect, right? Like the activity. I grew up going shopping with my mom. That was a big connection point.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're out with friends. What are you doing this weekend? And another one, the fourth one is social influence. So whether that is being out with friends, they're purchasing things, or you're just over at somebody's house and you see that they've got this thing that seems to be making their lives far more efficient. And I want that thing too. Or we're just scrolling Instagram and somebody is making some skincare product outfit look adorable. And now I'm one click buying it. And finally, the thrill of the hunt. And this one I also resonate with. I love searching for a deal. I love searching for the treasure in the midst of all of the weeds. I love the thrift store and yard sales for that reason. But I've realized over time, it's not just about getting the deal. I also have to want those things, have space for them, be willing to clean them and maintain them. And that takes up a lot of my time, energy, attention. But this thrill of the hunt still exists for me. And sometimes that's connected with wanting deals. So wherever we may find ourselves, and maybe it's a combination of these things, then we can implement some patterns that are congruent with what the impulse spending is. So if it's a habit spending, if that's primarily what we're identifying, yep, that's me, that's why I'm impulse buying, then figuring out what that cue, craving, reward cycle is for you and how you can interrupt it at the cue. And so if it is, time of day or location, what else can you do at that time of day? Or is there another location you can go to? Not to say that forever and always now you've got to drive a different way to your work, but just to interrupt it and create some of those new neural pathways. It could even be a habit that began during a time when it made sense in your life, but now it no longer serves you. I know Jen shares her example, how right after she gave birth, it was the summertime and it's always summer in Florida, but it was super hot outside, but she needed to get out of the house. And the only time her baby slept was in the car. So she'd go out, she'd go through the Starbucks line and just drive around. Well, the baby got older. The baby was sleeping in, regular in a bed, but she's still now just going out, getting a coffee. And so what served her at one point is no longer serving her. And now it's just mindless. And I think sometimes we just need that inventory. When it comes to stress, if it's stress shopping, what are other ways that we could reduce some of those cortisol levels? We've found in some of the research that we've done that exercise and meditation are the top 2 ways that we can decrease our stress hormones and feel more calm and relaxed. It's not always going to work. Maybe there's other things that we try out in replace of it. Those are just kind of the top 2 proven, this is some good ways to relieve some stress. And whether it's an activity, maybe we find other activities that are enjoyable. I think the point here is that we're not just stopping altogether, we're replacing. We're finding alternatives and potentially coming upon things that we just enjoy even more than spending. We just never gave ourselves the opportunity to find it.
I agree. You brought up a good point. This sense of like being on autopilot. And I used to be very much like that. For example, with alcohol years ago, like a decade ago, I was like, oh, it's Friday night, time for a drink. And I kept doing it for years and it wasn't harming me. But once I was like, why am I doing this? What's the point? Like, this isn't serving me right now. It was just like that awareness. And same thing goes, like maybe for some of us, it's like buying certain categories of things like makeup or clothes, or we all know what our thing is and going, you know what, like that served a purpose when I was in this part of my life, but now I don't need lipstick. I don't need shoes. In fact, I need to simplify what I already have. You mentioned something interesting, right? Like making more mindful financial decisions in a world where consumerism is like shoved down our throats, no matter where we look, no matter what we listen, unless they're listening to Frugal Friends or Maximize Minimalist, right?
Yes.
We're trying to teeter the scales a little bit for our listeners and our loved ones. So you mentioned one-time click, which I found very interesting since that's a newer feature on Instagram, at least for me, being able to shop and literally just click once on a Instagram shop and buy now, which you and I know reduces the friction, right? Between like, I see the thing, it's really cute, it's sold out 5 times, all the messaging that they're giving us. And, I don't even have to think. I just do the one-time click. So my question is, what do you do in between that to prolong the pause from, I see it, it's cute, maybe it's an impulse purchase, maybe it's not, but I like it, to should I actually buy this? How am I making this more mindful while still taking into consideration like all the different ways they're trying to reduce that. So they're trying to shrink that so they make more money, right? Makes sense. So what do you do?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of just really tangible things that we could consider. And I will say some of this is throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. We are human, we're dynamic, we're not all the same. What works for me might not work for somebody else. So I'll begin with, if this is the main place that you are impulse spending, whether it's you just love to scroll Amazon or it's through Instagram that you are buying, it could be worth considering alternative places to go for entertainment, whether that's in the evening or whenever you're kind of taking your breaks and you're scrolling. So that might mean finding something related. We like to talk about kind of big, medium, large things. When we replace our ongoing habits and patterns of behavior with something similar. So if we're scrolling on our phone at night and purchasing in the evening, going out for a run is not a congruent activity to replace it with. Maybe alternatively, this is when we're choosing to journal or read a book or even stay on our phones and find like a cathartic game that we can play, or we finally text all of our friends back that we've put on pause for a while. So just that break could really help, again, give our brains that space that we need. But if we're then talking about just being in the moment, because it is not realistic that we are never on the gram again and we don't engage in social media. Like, I'm not here for that. We're finding our radical middle. Then it could be identifying the people that you follow that aren't constantly trying to get you to buy things. I do think that there are some incredible accounts that we can follow that are aligned with the goals that we are setting for ourselves. And our goals change year over year, maybe even month to month. And I think we can find opportunities to take inventory of who am I following, who's helpful and beneficial for where I'm at right now, who's not, what accounts do I want to find to follow that might inspire me for the things that I've said I want to do over the next month, the next year. For me, some of that has included following different cooking accounts and meal planning and meal prep. And so when I'm just relaxed and scrolling, I'm actually getting inspired and motivated to do the things that I know are going to help my money when I'm awake the next day and ready to tackle it. And it really is kind of creating this, oh, look at what they're doing. I want to engage in that too. So curating who we follow, I think can't be understated. And then beyond that, if you're still finding yourself, you're about to push that button, this is just where training our brains to create a pause before we're about to hit that button, doing something with that urge though. So one of the things I like to do is on it's a Google Keep, like a notes app on my phone where I will write down the things that I want to buy. If it's something that came up on Instagram or Amazon or something I heard about, I put it in the list. So what that does for me is it honors the urge. I think that our urges to spend do tell us something. They're informative about us. They're valuable. And I need to put it somewhere. This gives the urge value. It puts it somewhere. It writes it down, but it doesn't require me to pull out my credit card right away. And then what I can do is come back to that list and see, am I still interested in this? Whether it's a day later or a couple of days later, or sometimes I don't even look at it for another month. Yeah. Maybe I'm even out at the store. And once I'm there, okay, I can pull up the list. What was it that I was looking for? Do I still want that thing? If I do, great. I've sat on it for a while now and I can feel really confident about spending money on it. So those are a couple of ways that we can kind of interrupt. I think a big piece of this is creating that pause. And it doesn't have to be long, even just a few seconds. Yes. What is it about this? I want to encourage non-why questions with this. Why can put us on the defense. It can cause us to be automatic fight mode, justification, but instead this curiosity about ourselves. What is it about this thing that I'm really drawn to? What problem do I think purchasing this is going to solve? Just those simple questions, even just pick one that's going to work for you, can help get more to the root of what's drawing me to spend right now. Is it truly my desire, my own values, or is it some dude in some marketing office wanting another yacht telling me I need this new headband?
I really appreciate how you highlighted that it's up to us in a large sense. I mean, it's only a portion of it, right? Is what we can control from an advertising piece. Obviously, there's sponsored ads. Companies are spending billions a year on Facebook and Instagram to put their content and products in front of us. But I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in forgetting that, choose who you follow. And what I'm guessing from you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is those people you follow who are teaching you the skill that you want to improve, like meal prepping, meal planning, cooking and baking. And like, that's something that you value right now in this season of life. My guess is those likely aren't people who every day are being like, 20 things you need in your kitchen in order to be the best cook ever, or like 15 products you need in your kitchen to be organized and efficient. Like these types of headlines where you're like, ooh, what do I need next? Right. And I think we often forget too, these people make a living off of doing this, and it gets real old. Once you identify the people who are doing this, you're like, you just promoted what? Like, I just bought this thing from you last week that you promoted, and now you're promoting a different brand that's the same. It's confusing. And you're like, oh, I got the wool pulled over my eyes.
Yes. Once you take the veil off, you really start to see it. And it can help in resisting the urge to impulse buy, to realize, oh man, you guys are just trying to sucker me into this and I'm not falling for it.
Yeah, I think there is such value in when you find that connection with someone. Of course, at some point, someone who's teaching meal prepping is going to be like, hey, this is my favorite cookware. That makes sense. Of course, it's up to us to try and figure out if it's authentic, genuine, all the things, if that's even something that's important to you. And I agree with practicing that pause. I do the same thing. I have a little notes tab in my iPhone, and I will write down what it is, but more often than not, to take action, but not buy, is I screenshot. I have so many random screenshots on my phone, and whenever I just happen to be back in my album, I'll be like, I'm not even kidding you. Sometimes, Jill, I'm like, that is not only not cute, it's ugly.
Yes.
And I love it because it just kind of makes me laugh. I feel like I'm winning, which I am, because I'm getting closer to my goal. I'm like, I beat the algorithm. Like, Katie, yes, I've got this. It feels so good to like get your way out of that system in a very intentional way. And this isn't about just that. It's about getting closer to your values, which is what this is what we talk about. Mm-hmm. And again, if you want to buy the thing, if you come back later, like give yourself permission to get the thing without guilt.
Yeah, exactly. To feel in control.
Yeah.
And the one in the driver's seat with our money feels so incredible. But again, like you're saying, yes, sometimes there are influencers that we want to hear, what's that product you use? I many times am glad to learn about, oh yeah, that actually does solve a problem that I've been having for a while. Thanks for telling me about this. It just is that sifting process.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier sales and like thrill of the hunt, right? Which I think a lot of us experienced. I remember growing up, and of course, this isn't a knocking on my mom, but she was always like, well, if it's on sale, like that's a great reason to buy something because you don't know if that sale is going to be available later. So the focus was on the sale and not on how the item was going to add to our lives. So that's kind of like the perspective I grew up with, like, oh, right. And it's no wonder that I grew up accumulating a lot of things that I didn't really love, right? And that I donated a year later because I was just buying the things kind of, again, autopilot. And I read about 88% of impulse shopping happens when it's sale related, which I found fascinating. So from that specific perspective, sales, because here's the thing, we all like a sale. I'm from the Midwest, I'm from Iowa, and I'm currently back home as we record this, but there is something about my Midwest roots where if someone compliments me on like earrings or a top, the first thing I'll say back is, thank you. It was on sale. It was $5 because it's like a very Midwest. It makes me feel good to share. I got a deal. So not only do I look cute, I'm smart, right? This is the underlying roots of it. Like you want people to know you're smart. And I think that again could play into it, but what's your perspective or philosophy on the sale aspect of items? Like, is this the right time to buy it? How do I decide this?
Yes, you have hit on so many important points about deals, and I'm right here with you. I still love a good deal. That's never going away.
It's again, the humanity of it.
Yes. Same. You're not going to come to my house and not hear something from me about what I got for free, what kind of discount I got on this thing. Like it's embedded in me. However, it is also important to recognize that sales are a marketing tactic. Sales are given not just for you, they are meant to make you buy and not just buy the sale item, but buy beyond that. and potentially buy something that's on sale just because it is on sale, not even because you necessarily needed or wanted it. This was another really interesting study that we came across in the book on sales and sales tactics, that of all of the stores, and I want to say there was something like 100 stores that they tracked over the course of something like 6 to 9 months and their sales strategies. And while they all advertised having sales, none of their prices changed significantly from kind of their market price over the span of that time. Only 2 by these standards had legitimate sales, and that was Apple and Costco. And you all know Apple is never running sales and discounts on their things. So if you do get a sale on it, then go for it. Okay. If it is the thing that you actually already wanted. And this is where I come back to that list. I think it's really important for me. I have to write things down. If you can keep one in the back of your head, do you? But having it written down can really help me to combat that red sticker, yellow sticker. It doesn't even matter what color. I know that it's a markdown, that I'm not going to purchase it if it's not something that's already on my list or something that I'm aware of. This is a problem that I have been looking to solve, not to mention is aligned with or can fit within my spending plan, kind of the parameters of what my income is allowing me to do month to month. And so sometimes I will even create within my spending plan margin to be able to impulse spend. So not be so restrictive with it, but know that I'm going to want to purchase things that I hadn't planned on. Let's just make room for this. Let's work within the confines of my humanity and allow myself to do this. But I would say it is far better to pay full price for something that is quality, that you know that you need, you've been thinking about for a while, than to mindlessly and consistently spend on deals and discounts. We will save far more money in the long run, even if we pay full price on something. We are currently in our quality over quantity era, and I think this really beautifully aligns with that. I think we can put pressure on ourselves, this perfection, probably both in decluttering and minimizing and simplifying, as well as in managing our finances, that we have to get it right 100% of the time. Every single time, it needs to be the best, most efficient spending decision. And that's just a mindset that we are pushing back on. It is better to not have gotten 20% off, but to feel really confident about the decision that you've made and not feel like you have to win every time with a deal, than it is to just be collecting things that we also know means more clutter in our households, more stress for us, more things that we have to pay attention to, than just being really certain about what we're purchasing.
What's been the most meaningful financial decision you've made that helped align your spending with your personal values?
So for me, it was a living choice. My husband and I lived in an RV, 2 different RVs over the course of about little over 2 years. This is not obviously necessarily a tip that everyone can take and go run with. It just is what made a huge difference for me in the necessity of downsizing, which also put me in touch with my level of consumption and waste in a very real way. I think a lot of times when we're living in some more typical or traditional housing situations, we're not always aware of how much we're consuming, how much we're getting rid of. And this put it front face for me to recognize, what do I spend on? What am I wanting to bring into my home? How am I getting rid of things? What does that look like? And shifted so much of my decision making around what I'm eating, what I'm doing for fun as activities. Like I said, I used to really enjoy going to thrift stores and yard sales and collecting things, but I collected them just because they were a deal. When I lived in 170 square feet, it's not going to fit in my house anymore. And that was a little bit, I had to embrace that begrudgingly. But what I found is that there are other things that I enjoyed more. And I think just living tiny helped us save more money, put more money towards, it's not a long-term lifestyle for me. I am now in a 1,500 square foot home, but it allowed us to get there sooner than maybe we would have if we had continued in more traditional housing. So while that's not for everyone. Not everyone can live in an RV. I think it is a call to the benefits of being aware of our habits, the way we engage with stuff, the way that we purchase things, how we are viewing ourselves, the story that we're telling ourselves about the things we have, the place we live, the money we earn, and finding ways to identify what's actually important here, though. What do I actually value? And are there things I can say very easy no's to for the better yeses?
So for those of us who either don't want to move into an RV or it's not an option in this season, I was thinking as you were talking, a lot of us experience that in a shorter, in a more shorter condensed form when we travel. When we travel and maybe we just took a carry-on, or maybe you took a checked bag, but you have less stuff when you're traveling, or like when you're living in a hotel room for a weekend, maybe you're visiting family, whatever the circumstance, or you're on a week-long vacation, you're living out of a suitcase in like one hotel. And every single time, I think once a week, probably, I get a message from a follower or a student of mine who said, Katie, I'm so excited to go home and tackle my clutter, because even living out of a hotel room and just like, there's so much less to maintain.
Yeah.
There's less toys, there's less clothes, there's less everything, there's less space, right? The physical parameters have significantly changed. And it's a great way to like get tapped back into that motivation. But for you, obviously yours was more of a long-term thing. So anytime we can kind of take these experiences where we're just outside of our home, maybe for you, it's like going to your job and having this small cubicle and you're like, wow, this isn't home, but it's certainly easier to maintain, and being able to take a taste of that with you when you go home and go, oh, wow, what do I like about that space? It's smaller. It's easier to clean, all these different things.
Yeah.
So you've got an exciting new book that just came out. I want to give you some time to talk about this. Can you tell my listeners where they can grab it and what the book is?
Yeah. So it's Buy What You Love Without Going Broke, and it can be purchased wherever you get books. It released January 7th. So we're so excited about that. People are starting to read it and we're getting feedback, which is cool. It is essentially a spending guide, how to spend. Spending is a skill. We think that we're not born with it, but we can develop it. And so really getting to the root of our spending behaviors, the ways in which we can make more mindful decisions and feel really good about our money management, not just for the here and now, but the long term. We believe that this book helps to lay the foundation of personal understanding as well as the context in which we're living to be able to create a spending plan and lifestyle and habits and mindset shifts that will support these good, better, less shameful habits and ideas around money for a lifetime.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to read this. I'm ordering. Actually, I'm going to order like right now, because it feels like to me, it's a continued conversation of this episode today. It's a step-by-step game plan, which I think we all need. And no matter where you fall on, what message is aligned in this episode today. So first of all, as someone who's just wrapped writing my first book, thank you for writing this book. I don't think I've thanked authors enough who've spent, the blood, sweat, and tears investing their expertise and creativity and just dumping all of that into a book, and really ultimately how much time and money you're saving people who just pay $20 for a book. So I have a brand new appreciation really as a new author myself. So thank you for writing the book. Yeah.
Oh, and likewise, right back at you. I think it is so important. And I think when people buy your book, when they buy our book, I think what this tells the bigger companies, the publishers, is that we want content like this.
Yes.
We don't want the one size fits all, the very dry, the advice that doesn't quite work for us. We want the ones that recognize our whole personhood and give us permission to find freedom and flexibility in the way that we plow and pave our own way. And that's what the purchase of these books does for the authors, and create space for more authors to be able to talk about these things that are actually important and making really impactful changes in our lives.
Yeah. And sustainable too, right? It's not just a flash in the pan thing. It's about sustainability, and that is key. What I'm taking away from this conversation too is just a reminder to me is like, we are an evolution, and to be able to bring in the awareness and just ask ourselves, like, is this serving me right now? no matter what habit we're talking about, which is what I love about what you and I teach, it's like you can broaden the scope and apply it to pretty much anything. And so just thank you for your golden nuggets you shared today. There's so many takeaways. I know I'm going to re-listen to this episode.
Yay, thanks.
And I'll read your book at the same time. I can't get enough of Jill and Jen. So thanks for coming on this show.
Thanks so much, Katie. It's a pleasure.